In the last video, we set up the formwork for some simple walls on our earth-sheltered home. The Shotcrete crew was actually too busy to come out that first week, so we had an extra weekend for prep, and I decided I could put in half the mudroom roof framework without it being in the way of the Shotcrete crew. We started by using the grinder to trim the rolled steel to fit those slots that I'd formed in the concrete walls when we first poured those ICFs. Once we had one done, we could cut the other two to match, but of course we still wanted to test each one for fit. After all three were ready, I started drilling holes for the ends of the rebar, and Hunter started making the steel L brackets for the arches. Then we used tapcons to attach the steel brackets to the wall and welded the steel arches to the brackets. Here's a close-up of the final situation. The bracket is actually sitting on a 2-inch deep concrete ledge in the concrete wall, so the screws are not really holding it up, they're just keeping it still. The holes for the rebar were drilled about 4 inches deep and spaced about 6 inches apart. Then we welded a piece of rebar between the arches to stiffen the assembly even further. Figured I might as well drill the holes for the second half of the roof while we had the tools out. We also decided to prepare the remaining steel arches. There's a shape change at this end of the room, so each of these would need to be custom fit. Then we just set them aside for after the Shotcrete job was done. That afternoon, my friend Dan came out with another friend, Paxton, and his kids, and suddenly it was a whole crew to help with the little roof section. I handed out assignments and things got cranking. Paxton's son can actually weld, so I was mostly just measuring stuff and keeping everyone tasked. The steel went up in record time. Since we had more time, we kept going on the wood forms. These boards are held up by a number 10 self-tapping screw drilled up from the bottom into the steel arches. The first two boards were easy, but then the third one took some fiddling to make it fit. In the end, the assembly looked like this. We had half-inch rebar spaced out every foot, but to give the roof more grip to the walls, we also drilled some 1-foot long pieces of 5/8 rebar and put those in between those. The OSB formed the bottom of the formwork, and the concrete could be added from the top. As a final step, I added the ENT conduit for that ceiling light. We also covered the assembly in plastic just to protect the wood from any rain. Crew eventually came out the following Friday, so I took the day off work and got out there early for final prep. Mostly it was just cleaning off the footings really well so the Shotcrete would bond without dust in the way. Meanwhile, they got all their equipment set up. Work started on the bottom half of this internal wall next to the basement stairs, and then around the structure they went. They had an extra finishing guy on the crew this time, so they did a better job of it. Here I'm using some waste shotcrete to manually fill in the concrete for this 6x6 inch column on this side of the doorway. I just didn't want the mess of them shooting it. Meanwhile, they were cranking away on the northeast side. From the inside, safely behind the plastic, it looks like this. I had those little extra boards between the windows to help keep everything plumb and to stop them from doing too much in one pass, so now I needed to remove them. I know this finishing work still looks very rough and messy, but it's actually the best finishing I got from these guys in all their visits, so I was pretty happy at the time. After they left for the day, my friend Aaron came out and helped me clean up the rebound before it hardened. They were not finished and would need to come back on Monday, so I suddenly had an opportunity to finish that mudroom roof as part of this shoot, so Aaron and I started finishing up that steel right away. Since the wall was still soft, we could actually slide the rebar right into the shotcrete without even drilling. And here's a Friday evening flyover on the lift. Saturday morning and Hunter was back. I couldn't resist stripping the forms in some sections where the wall was complete. You can see the foam blocks on the top of the wall that are forming 2-inch deep ledges for the roof of this section, sort of like we had in the mudroom. Back in the mudroom, we had to fit the flat boards to an interesting shaped ceiling. As before, the first couple boards went in easily, and then the last one was tricky. Then we attached additional boards over those seams, etc. Meanwhile, my kids built themselves a seesaw. I only filmed for a minute, but this actually kept them busy playing for quite a while. Monday morning and the crew is back. The man lift wasn't actually strong enough to hold them level with the weight of the two guys and the shotcrete hose, so they ended up just shooting the mud roof from that funny angle. Then they drove it around and they did these sidewalls. As soon as they were done with the walls, we were down at the bottom digging away the rebound, so we could more easily lay the drain tile. From this angle you can see why I couldn't form that roof span between the bedrooms and this wall until after this was shot. It would have just been too much in the way. Here's some real-time video. Here Nate has the remote that controls the concrete flow on his own hip because Billy is busy finishing somewhere else. You can see he ends up shooting a bunch extra every time he turns it on or off. In this scene, Nate is actually using his hand to try and prevent shotcrete from blowing over this wall and into the house. We still had a lot to scrape up, but I appreciate however much this saved. And that's it, at least for the shotcrete. I'll still be spending plenty of time to stucco over this lath and make things look pretty, but this was another big leap forward.